Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Effective Coaching Strategies that Unlock Seller Performance. A quick housekeeping note before we get started. We'll be sending the slides and recording out in the next few days, so look for that in your email. And we, of course, want to hear from you during this webinar. So share your thoughts and comments in the chat, and we'll have some time at the end for questions. So go ahead and drop yours in the Q&A. Let's go ahead and get started. My name is Stevie Keene, and I'm the Senior Director of Content and Creative here at Challenger and Richardson. My producer is Sarah Doherty, who works with me on our marketing team. And I am delighted today to introduce today's presenters, two exceptional colleagues who both bring extensive experience in coaching and development. And first, I'd like to welcome Isabel Gillespie, who is our Director of Major Accounts.
Good morning, everyone. Like Stevie said, my name is Isabel Gillespie. I come from the Challenger side, the legacy Challenger side of the house. I've been there about 8 years, wearing a couple of different hats, but I think most importantly for today, I've been both an individual contributor and on the receiving end of coaching. I continue to be in my role as a manager as well. And so really excited to talk about just, elements from that transition as well as lessons learned and still areas to improve. And then I'm really excited to be joined by my colleague, Chris Tenay, who I'll let introduce himself.
Hi, thanks so much, Isabel. Chris Tenay, Executive Vice President for Enterprise Solutions. I have been a people leader and a manager for the better part of 2 decades. I was also, for a time, the Chief Product Officer here, and I am passionate about the ability of coaching to help people reach their maximum performance. Both as sellers, but also just as human beings, the people that we have on our teams and that we lead and we coach. So I'm delighted to dig into this topic and talk a little bit about both the research, but also some practical tips you can use in your organization to drive a better coaching culture.
Awesome. All right. Well, super excited, Chris, for the two of us to be doing this. I think for those that have joined us before, this will be a familiar place to start. We'd love to get a poll from folks that are joining and just really give us a sense of how you would describe coaching currently at your organization. There's obviously a pretty wide gamut, but we've broken it down to, look, it's not there at all today. And I'm really looking to take away some ideas for hopefully getting that started. Maybe it's happening in pockets here or there, but there's not any formal practices behind it. Maybe it is formal and it is happening and we have this culture behind it. That's great, but we know that there's ways to improve it. Or, you could be the gold standard and potentially have a very deeply rooted culture at your organization. So excited to see this. I think my theories were most of us are going to fall in the middle and are probably here to be, learn a little bit more of what we could be doing.
Yeah, if anybody votes for number 4, we should ask them to co-present with us, Isabel. Get them to share what they're doing in their organization.
Yeah.
All right, here are the results. What do you think?
We had a handful that maybe are that gold standard. So
11.
I'm excited to hear there. But I think what you could also argue is, look, it's deeply embedded in our culture. That doesn't mean there's not room for improvement. There's turnover, there's changes, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it means for managers and their role in having to adapt to some of that change today. But for the most part, it sounds like a lot of us are excited to take 1 or 2 things away from today that hopefully help drive some improvement. So let's jump in and kind of baseline talk about, coaching is generally recognized as important. A lot of us are here because we know that, but we'd love to tap into just what we know, especially on the Challenger side, and most of us coming from commercial backgrounds. Matt Dixon and Brent Adamson are likely familiar names. They're co-authors of the Challenger Sale. Matt's name might be familiar to you from authoring the Jolt Effect more recently. These two are known for pulling some pretty groundbreaking insights from a broader research study and continuing to do so. They also are looking at behavior change. And so why we wanted to pull this in is they specifically recognize the importance of coaching and the role that that really plays in driving performance, which, as a lot of us being commercial leaders that are focused on driving outcomes, it's important to us. That's something that gets our attention. So what I'll call out first is publicly, most organizations will say that they are trying to support a coaching culture. I rarely get responses to asking that question with new clients that are, no, it's not important to us. So about 70% of leaders will tell you, yes, We are trying to do that. It's important to us. However, what a lot of the organizations that we work with will say to us, and that ranges from small, high growth organizations all the way to very mature Fortune 500, is that they don't have these kinds of cultures set up. We have the best intentions, but we just either don't know where to get started, or we've tried, or we're managing just too much change, and that hasn't been a focus. So we know it's difficult. That's why we're here. And we're going to unpack some of those root causes as to why it can be so difficult. But what we want to talk about is just why it's so important. Why should this actually be something that we're prioritizing, focusing on? And actually, why are you putting other efforts that as a business you're making and other investments at risk by not coaching or allocating the right amount of coaching to the right people? So to jump in, this might be a familiar graphic or concept for some people, but it really helps illustrate the answer here as to why coaching is just so important. I'll start by saying the world that we're operating in is very dynamic. Change is coming from both internal factors. I see new leaders come in pretty frequently. New strategies are being rolled out at the beginning of the year. We're launching new technologies, new products. There are also external factors that are driving some of this change that we're having to react to. New regulations, new competitors, changes in our customers' buying habits. And so we're constantly finding ourselves in a position where we're having to change. And we're usually having to make changes to just what we're doing in our day-to-day. So every year we're seeing organizations invest significant amounts of dollars and significant amounts of time, capacity, important people in helping drive some of this change to adapt to what we have to in order to continue to meet similar and higher levels of success. So what we're seeing happen, though, very naturally when we're making some of these changes is that humans, and in this context, we'll talk about sellers, will forget what they've learned if it's not reinforced or applied. They're actually going to forget it as quickly as a day after. Over half of that they'll forget. And then by 30 days later, we're forgetting almost 90% of it. So the role that coaching and reinforcement plays on improving that forgetting curve is fairly significant. I've seen this happen at clients. I've also seen it happen with my own team when we're rolling out a fast change, maybe in reaction to something, and we bring it up once, we spend a lot of time talking about it. We prepped some of this curriculum. We've taken everyone out of the field to sit through a training. And for one reason or another, we just forget about the follow-up and bringing it up on the next team call, for example, or I'm not taking the time to pop into Gong or join a call to see what this looks like when they're applying it. And people are forgetting, or they're actually trying to apply it, and maybe it didn't go well because they either didn't do it effectively or it was the wrong time to do it. So without that either positive reinforcement or just that nudge, we're seeing it go away. So we know it's important, but we also know there are limited hours in a day for you as a manager and a coach to actually do this. So how do you decide where to allocate your time? And what I'll say is when we were peeling back the curtain on both Challenger and Richardson best practices when it comes to coaching, there was quite a lot of overlap. This is an area where we were, I would say, very strongly connected, Chris, in our conversations on the back end. And it's where managers should be spending their time, particularly with coaching and improving, the goal being improving our results, yielding better outcomes. So this applies in a lot of ways to coaching. The left hand, what you see in the graphic, demonstrates where a typical manager is spending their time. The larger the slice of the pie, the more time spent with that population. So naturally, it's going to be easiest for us, or probably feel very straightforward. And we're assuming we're going to spend our time with our low performers. They're probably the ones that we see the greatest opportunities to help. They might be the loudest voice, asking for more help from us. So that's where we're spending a lot of our time. Next, the core performers, which usually makes up the majority of the team. And then we've got our high performers. A lot of times we're just letting them do their own thing. However, what we've assessed when we looked at time spent and where to spend it in order to yield the better results, there's actually a better way to approach it. And so we refer to this as moving the middle on the right-hand side. So high-performing managers are investing most of their focus on their core performers, followed by high performers, and then lastly, their low performers, in order to yield better results and create more high performers across their team. Chris, in our prep, I know this is an area that you had a lot of firsthand knowledge about just in your own efforts with coaching other managers. And it's been fairly influential in helping make some of your product decisions. I'm curious, and I'd love to just hear your perspective on how you're helping leaders justify this time spent and making that shift if they just more naturally were, maybe reflecting more the left-hand side here.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as leaders, we all want to help low performers on our teams. And this isn't to say that low performers don't deserve coaching. I think the important thing is, as sales managers and sales leaders, our job is to help deliver growth for the business. And the question here is, where do you have the biggest opportunity to help drive growth for your organization? And when you look, if we can get the next build on this slide, that would be helpful. When you look at where we have the biggest opportunity to help drive revenue for the business, it's taking those big swath of core performers that we have on our teams and helping them all get incrementally a little bit better. And that is, as you think about the limited amount of time that sales managers have to invest in helping grow their teams, that's where we see you're going to deliver the biggest return for your business. Followed by then helping your high performers stay at the top of their game with little incremental improvements, just like the greatest athletes in the world, the Steph Currys and, Tiger Woods of this world continue to have coaches, even when they're performing at the top of their game, because those little incremental improvements help them stay there and get that much better.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the comments too, it's not unfamiliar to some folks. I see the muscular middle is how we're referring to it too. Yeah, absolutely. It's probably the majority of your team is those core performers, those folks that we see those smaller incremental opportunities to make some of those changes that are going to ultimately convert some more of them to high performers and yield some solid results for us. So we've talked about who we're spending our time with. That's one key element of effective coaching. I also want to unpack just why coaching can be so difficult sometimes in the current environment that we're creating for our reps as well. So starting out and looking at some of the expectations we have for coaches, about 65% of sales organizations are actually assessing coaches on selling skills as opposed to management skills. There's this assumption that a successful rep can basically be tasked with replicating their success across the team. It makes sense in theory. I myself am a product of making that transition from an individual contributor into a management role. And although I had some experience in my previous role, and most people could argue this, right? In sales, we're trying to manage our customers, our clients through a sales process. We're having to work with client success folks and do a little bit of managing or coaching. We're on the receiving end of it as well. However, moving into a formal manager role, there's an entirely new skill set that I found myself having to tap into. I've also noticed that the further away I am from being an individual contributor, the more the environment that my team is selling into and our customers, even our products now, is evolving. It's changed. And so what worked for me back when I was in seed is not necessarily as reliable or even credible anymore as what might need to work or what we might need to do differently today with the current set of problems that someone might be bringing to me. And so I found that although sometimes people might be coming to me looking for just, a short, quick answer, going through that motion of having that coaching conversation, asking some thoughtful questions to help them come to a conclusion and tapping into the information that they have about the current environment, the situation tends to yield much better results a lot of the times. Next, when we look at, we know coaching is driving performance. However, what Gartner noticed is that people are actually just spending about 9% of their time developing their direct reports. We know there's a lot of different hats that managers are wearing, right? There's performance management, there's teaching, but the fact that this was only 9%, to me, this was even pretty low sounding. And Chris, I know you were pretty familiar with that stat as well. Like, what do you attribute that reason being to why we're spending just so little time on development, even though we do know it's important and a necessary part of the job?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna ask for everybody else to weigh in on this a little bit later in the webinar. But I think for me, what I observe is just how many different competing priorities there are for managers between leadership responsibilities, management, inspection, pipeline, territories. The list just goes on, and coaching feels like soft skills, and it falls to the bottom of the priority list. And so the more we can do to help managers see the connection to business outcomes, which we'll talk a little bit more about, I think the more we can help them build coaching into their practice.
Yeah. I love that. I'm seeing some things in the chat that are validating that. And honestly, that last bucket, the third one, would probably be one of those reasons too. Like managers not necessarily having the confidence that they have the skill sets in order to do that. So they're actually just avoiding the task altogether, not because they don't want to help and they don't think it's important, but because they just don't necessarily think that what they're able to bring to the table could be applicable to today's environment. Even referring back to what I was saying about it looks different than the world that I was selling in as an individual contributor. So we know that obviously a lack of coaching or bad coaching can hurt with learning retention. We know why it's difficult, but I'd love to just take a second to kind of break down what impact this can have on the things that are very top of mind for us as sales leaders, the dollars and our bottom line. So I want to jump to just an easy way to think about this. So an organization called the Sales Management Association, they do a lot of digging into and research on coaching and management and just best practices, obviously with the intent of helping us here. But they wanted to look into what does it cost to have a bad coach in seat? How much is it costing an organization for just that one individual? And this assumes we only have one, right? Maybe there's a couple, depending on how large our organization is, that we've kept them around. It's helpful to just have that body in seat. But they developed a formula. So we'll be sharing this slide in the recording after the fact, so you can do this yourself. It's pretty simple though. First, look at the difference in performance from your top coaches to your bottom. So consider the percentage of goal attainment, subtract the lower from the higher. Take the decimal number of that percentage, multiply it by the average number of reps on each team, and then the average quota. The number is going to vary at your organization, obviously, based on the number of quota, or excuse me, the average quota size that you have there. But when they calculated this, what they found was that on average, one underperforming sales manager is costing an organization $3.5 million in revenue every year. That was an ouch moment for Chris and I as we were thinking about this. I think we knew it was important going into it, but to actually see that number, if you do take the time to calculate that, Chris and I were both on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear just what you came up with. And obviously we're going to spend some time on the second half here talking about ways we can actually change that. But calculating that number, if you're looking to make that case internally for why we should be investing in this, this is a great place to get started and take some time. So knowing we want to pivot into what we can actually do to help with coaching, take some time, a minute or so in the chat and just type out, like, what are you doing at your organization? What do you wish you were doing? What have you heard you could potentially do to just better support coaching and embed that more deeply in your coaching culture? Give people a second here. And obviously we don't want to totally hide the punchline. We've got quite a bit here, but we always love to crowdsource and probably find some camaraderie amongst people that are trying similar things. I love Timothy Moore's comment.
Yeah.
Expecting some ownership on both sides, right? We want to make sure we have that willing participant, someone that's going to be receptive to coaching ahead of time too. That's going to be huge. And creating that culture of like, it's okay to fail or be wrong, right? We want to help you. We want to give you the tools to be successful.
I love that. Shadowing sessions I saw, which is good. Oh, Coach Scott had Coach the Coach sessions, which can be so powerful. So, not just equipping managers to coach, but how do you give coaches the opportunity to learn from other coaches? It's great.
Yeah, identifying the right skill set for managers, thinking back to, look, the skill set's just different. You can't necessarily just take what worked for you as a seller and be a good manager. I think that's being felt across the group.
For sure. For sure. So what can we do about this? How can we implement better coaching programs in our organizations, build a culture of coaching? I think, we sort of assume that coaching has been around for a long time. We've always had sports coaches and other kinds of coaches. But the idea of coaching for performance actually started in the 1960s, and it started with a guy named Sir John Whitmore, who, if you have 5 minutes after this webinar, go Google him. There's a fascinating Wikipedia page. He actually was a British race car driver. and Noble. He went to Eton. And in his career, he got really interested in the power of coaching for professionals. And he is the one who coined this term performance coaching in his book, Coaching for Performance. And he said, listen, coaching is about unlocking people's potential to maximize their own performance. And I love how he sums it up. It's about helping them to learn rather than teaching them. So the mindset of a great coach is, how do I create those aha moments for my team? Not tell them what good looks like or how to do it, but actually facilitate their learning and their aha moments so that it's more authentic and likely to stick. And John Whitmore defined that great coaches do really three things very well. The first is they connect and communicate well, and that's critically important for building authentic trust. In order to be able to give feedback in coaching, the person who's on the receiving end of that feedback and coaching has to believe that you have their best interests in mind. It can't come in as critical, but if it's going to stick, if they're truly going to change their behaviors and their habits, they have to believe that you're there to help them improve in their business. The second thing that he identified was that you have to have clarity around measurement and assessment. We often talk in business, you get what you measure, but the same is true with people. You get the behaviors that you measure. And by being clear about what people are being held responsible for and how they're going to be measured in their role, and then having clarity and transparency about how you assess that, it establishes groundwork for coaching that takes things away from being personal. So things aren't personal criticism. It allows you to have a conversation about metrics and details. And that can allow you to have some more candid conversation and really start to focus on coaching the things that are impacting your business rather than, boy, I wish you had turned up differently, or I wish you had introduced yourself differently. We can start to performance coach, which is, what are the behaviors that are going to impact your outcomes? And the final piece then flows right from that, and that is action and accountability. How do you create clear action plans that both parties agree to, the coach and the person being coached, so that there's clarity on what the expectations are, and we know what the next steps are going to be after that conversation. Isabel, I know you do this every day with your team. I'd love any reactions or like where you focus as a manager in your coaching. Then we'll turn on to the benefits of getting coaching right.
Yeah. What I'll call out too, even before I say anything, and I'm sure the chat would agree with me, it's an ongoing thing that we're looking to improve at and get better, right? A lot of times we know what we should or could have done differently in a situation, but you're just reacting and responding in the moment. The one that I really harp on the most is that communication element and just communicating basically across all three of these buckets, right? And I think I'm seeing a lot of that called out. Someone had a really great one, like they have to know you care before they care what you know about. If I'm just going to start telling them things that I know, like it has to come from a place of them knowing that I want to help them, that I have their best interest in mind, but also there has to be clear expectations that we've communicated, right, between all of us. And that also comes from the broader organization, not just me. Is that clearly being communicated at all levels, not just from their individual manager too? And so that's something I know that we've had a lot of conversations with clients about, is just making sure that it's not just coming from the manager, it's coming from levels above that and peripheral roles as well.
I love that. Yeah, and Catherine just said in the chat, lead with questions instead of a tell. We often say diagnose before you prescribe in coaching. Jen asked the question, how do you measure effective coaching? And that's where we're going to go next. Effective coaching is about two things. It's about whether or not it's happening. So there are ways that you can measure the extent to which you're planning for and executing coaching conversations and coaching sessions. We can do assessment with managers and sellers about the quality of that coaching. But when you get it right, there are three ways that you can measure the impact that that's having on your business. The first is that great coaching can accelerate and sustain learning. Gartner research found that by developing a strong coaching program, you can actually measure up to 4x ROI on the investment between training alone and training plus coaching. In fact, we have a client named Connection, and they credit their investment in training plus coaching for delivering a 13-to-1 ROI. So there are definitely ways that you can measure the sustainment and acceleration of learning and the return on that investment. The second is you can actually measure a return on revenue growth. So there are a lot of stats about how coaching can affect revenue growth. Training industry magazine did a study where they looked at the win rates for sellers who had high-performing coaches versus those that had average-performing coaches. And they found that the teams with high-performing coaches actually had a 53% higher win rate than the control group. And who on this call wouldn't like to have a win rate? I'd take 5% or 10% higher. I don't even need 50% in order to have a really meaningful impact on our business. And the last, and I think this is really important, I was just talking to a client about this yesterday, is better retention of sales professionals. The cost of losing a sales professional and having to go out and re-recruit, rehire, re-onboard that sales professional can be massive. Gallup found that the average cost of replacing a seller is 1.5 times their base salary. And if an average base salary for a B2B seller is $100,000 or $130,000 US, on average, that's about almost $200,000 to replace a seller when they've left your organization. So if we can invest in people, retain them, and develop them, it helps them stay with the business and it helps you avoid that cost. So there are real benefits to effective coaching. I'd love to hear from you in the chat. We'll take 30 seconds and just share with us, what are the barriers to effective coaching in your business? What do you see? If we know that we should be doing it, why are we not doing it? Time. Yep, time. Conflicting priorities. Resources, fighting fires. Yeah, so much of it is time management, right? It's about where we actually focus our time. And I think what is interesting, because we hear this a lot, we don't have enough time to coach effectively and meet our goals. Our managers are great, but they don't have a lot of structure for executing coaching. All of the research shows that you don't need huge changes in where you focus your time to get big impacts from coaching. In fact, Gartner found that by just tweaking your coaching by, a couple of hours a month, 3-4 hours per month, great coaches can make big improvements. And so, the real takeaway here is the most effective coaches prioritize coaching, developmental coaching, and they make it even with skills development and deal level coaching. They are coaching the deals, but they're carving out some of that time that they're otherwise just coaching deals to coach skills as well. And when you connect the dots for them between when I build this skill, I actually generate more revenue, they start to see the carrot for why investing time in additional coaching is really valuable to the organization. So I want to leave you with 3 specific strategies you can use with your teams to get them on track with better coaching. The first is, we really urge you to do an audit of your sales manager's time. Where are they spending their time? Use AI, use conversational intelligence and call recording to really evaluate to what extent your managers are fighting fires and coaching deals versus where they have an opportunity to spend more time coaching skills. Once you visualize that for your organization and for your managers, it becomes much easier to have a conversation about how they reprioritize their time. The second is connect seller skills and behaviors to the business outcomes that you're looking to drive. And then have a conversation about those skills in your coaching conversations so that it's much more explicit for sellers and managers which skills actually lead to the biggest impacts. And then treat every coaching opportunity as an opportunity to model the skills that you want to see in your organization. We call that coaching by example. It's how the manager turns up to coach is as important as how the seller turns up in front of your customer. And finally, we talk about integration. We see a big disconnect often in organizations between investing in coaching training, but then they don't connect or integrate that training into the way managers and coaches conduct their day-to-day work. So build tools, build coaching planner tools, embed those in your CRM, embed those in where managers are doing the rest of their people management tasks, and it's much more likely that they'll take those tasks and actually embed them into everyday coaching activities. Finally, we'll just leave you with one final thought. Building great coaches is not the end of development for your managers. It's actually the beginning. Building coaching excellence creates a foundation for you to then start developing all the other skills that a great sales manager needs in order to fight those other fires. Sales manager discipline around time and territory management, how they manage their pipeline, how they review opportunities, thinking about motivational leadership and how they lead people differently, how they build and strengthen teams, and finally, how each sales manager has an opportunity to help strengthen your sales culture. All of those are really important responsibilities of a sales leader, and all of those are easier to build in your team once they have a great foundation in coaching. Isabel, any final thoughts as somebody who manages teams and coaches people every day? How do you see this?
Even what I'm taking away from this and the prep that we've had is just the importance of regular self-reflection on where you can improve, because we are asking the same for our reps and acknowledging the fact that the environment they're operating in is changing. Same with the one that we are constantly coaching into and having to meet people with where they're at and what they're dealing with. So taking that moment, not just to sit down and assess where your team is at and where they need those opportunities for development, but doing that with yourself too, as a coach and a manager. And then going out there, depending on the culture of your organization, but seeking those resources and areas that you can get that help from, whether it's this webinar, some Google searches, tapping into your colleagues. I think those are some major things I've taken away and just seen in my experience in this role.
Totally agree. And for everyone on the call, Isabel and I would love to connect with you on LinkedIn, connect with us. And if there's ever an opportunity to have a conversation about coaching in your organization, please don't hesitate to reach out. Stevie, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Chris and Isabel. That was fantastic. So we are at time, but we're going to take a couple questions. And so before we do that, I just want to note up on the QR code, and then our producer is going to put the link in the chat as well. We do have, if you want to dive in deeper, a new white paper called the Coaching Efficiency Paradox. So you can kind of dive deep into how Challenger and Richardson are taking on coaching and figuring these issues out together. First question, Isabel, you kind of addressed this in the chat, but I'm going to bring in a question from Leonard, which is, what kind of process should coaches use? What are the options there?
Yeah. And obviously, Chris, jump in here too. I think at the end of the day, having a framework is better than probably not. There's not necessarily going to be a one size fits all. However, a framework that we've seen a lot of success with is the PAUSE framework. It's an acronym. It's fairly easy if you look that up, but it obviously emphasizes preparation going into the conversation that you have as a manager, similar to what we would expect our reps to do going into any sales meeting or conversation that they're having. Take that time to make sure you have your thoughts in place, some of the questions you might be thinking about having, and prepare for those more formal conversations. It can also apply as you get more comfortable with it to some of those more ad hoc situations that come up. But Chris, I'm not sure if you stumbled across any other frameworks that you would like to call out as well.
Yeah, I think first of all, having a framework, any framework, is better than not having any framework at all. But once you go to pick a framework, for me, the most important thing is having a framework that aligns well to your sales methodology, because every opportunity for your manager to coach is an opportunity for them to reinforce your sales framework as well. And so to the extent to which your coaching and selling approach align, that's a good thing. Because it's a force multiplier in your business, and it reduces the cognitive dissonance between, oh, my seller says I got to turn up and sell this way, but actually my manager is coaching me in a different way. So I encourage you to find sales and coaching frameworks that line up with one another. And Richardson Challenger is absolutely here to help you with that if it's helpful.
Great. I'm going to take one more question. And I'm going to paraphrase Nadim's question, which is about sales enablement. So sales enablement is super important. It sometimes can be a smaller team. How can you effectively use sales enablement in your coaching strategy?
Do you want to start with that one, Isabel?
I love that one.
Go. You start.
No, I think, sometimes we are begging sales enablement at clients to have more of an active role in coaching the coaches, as it was called out in there, and just prioritizing bringing support there. What I would almost want to call and advise against is solely relying on sales enablement to be your coaches. I've also seen organizations fall into that gap. And I think it goes back to the skill set. It really does depend on what we're hiring them to be and have that expertise around. However, the typical sales enablement profile, I see typically that time is better spent on other tasks and things, and they have the better expertise than our managers that have some of that closer proximity to the actual application of deals and opportunities where we're applying these skills and our methodology or whatever that might look like. So I would just call out not falling into that trap of solely relying on sales enablement to be your coaches. However, yeah, Chris, curious to tap into what you've advised or seen with sales enablement playing that role in coaching the coaches, since I know you've done that firsthand.
Yeah, I think for me, the thing about sales enablement that's so powerful is that they have a lot of tools and technology in your organization that are already looking at things like selling behaviors and how the sales organization is interacting with your customers. But there's also information in all of those tools. I'm thinking about call recording tools, for example, like Gong and Zoom IQ and things like that. There's information in there about how your managers are turning up and coaching your teams as well. It's just that sales enablement doesn't often look at that information with that lens on. So I think you can have a really collaborative conversation with your enablement team to say, hey, we want to set up trackers in Gong or Zoom IQ, for example, to look for when coaching conversations are happening and if they are happening or if they're not happening. And it can help shine a light both on where good things are happening in the business, but also where you have opportunities to spend more time coaching.
Well, great answers. Chris mentioned this in the chat, but if we didn't get to your question, we will be following up. So thank you so much for sharing and sharing your insights and answering our questions. We really appreciate you giving us your time today. At the end of this webinar, there will be a short survey. We really do read them, so it helps us a lot to get your feedback. Chris, Isabel, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, sharing your expertise. Be sure to follow us on Richardson and Challenger on LinkedIn. In a couple days, you'll receive the recording and slides. And yeah, thank you all so much for joining and have a great day.
Thank you.
So long.